Some gifts are meant to set you free, even when they feel like abandonment. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. Crisp white paper that would change everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and what it means to truly live. Inside was a one-way ticket to nowhere I'd ever imagined going, handed to me by the person I'd spent 32 years trying to please. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm 54 years old. Until 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. Mother of one brilliant daughter, widow of 8 years, former high school guidance counselor who'd devoted her entire existence to making everyone else's dreams come true, while forgetting she'd ever had any of her own. I lived in the same house, in Portland, Oregon, where I'd raised my daughter, Sofia, surrounded by photo albums chronicling every achievement, every milestone, every moment that proved I was a good mother, or so I believed. Sofia graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with a degree in environmental engineering. She landed a prestigious job with a renewable energy firm in San Francisco, bought a stunning loft in SOMA, and at 28 was already making more money than I'd ever dreamed of. She was everything I'd hoped she'd become: independent, successful, confident. What I didn't realize was that in raising her to need nothing from anyone, I'd also raised her to need nothing from me. My husband Miguel died suddenly of a heart attack when Sofia was 20, just as she was finishing her junior year. The grief nearly destroyed us both, but we leaned on each other through those dark months. Or rather, she leaned on me while I held us both together, working 2 jobs to finish paying for her education, selling Miguel's vintage car collection to cover the funeral expenses, and somehow managing to keep smiling through every graduation ceremony, every job interview, every celebration where her father should have been standing beside me, bursting with pride. After Sofia moved to San Francisco, our relationship shifted into something I couldn't quite name. She'd call every Sunday, a dutiful check-in that felt more like an obligation than genuine connection. Our conversations followed the same script: her work projects, her apartment renovations, her weekend plans with colleagues whose names I struggled to remember. When I'd try to share something about my life, the community theater group I'd joined, the painting class I was taking, the small freelance consulting work I'd started, her responses felt polite but distant, like she was listening to a pleasant acquaintance rather than her mother. The visits became increasingly rare. Thanksgiving if she couldn't find friends to spend it with. Christmas for exactly 48 hours, during which she'd work on her laptop for half the time. My birthday warranted a phone call and flowers delivered by a service. Mother's Day had become an expensive brunch at a restaurant she chose, where we'd sit across from each other making small talk while she checked her phone between courses. I told myself it was natural. Sofia was building her career, her life. This was what successful parenting looked like: raising a child who could thrive without you. But late at night, in the house that had grown too quiet since Miguel's death, I sometimes wondered if I'd done my job too well. If in teaching her to be self-sufficient, I'd somehow taught her that needing people, especially me, was a weakness to be overcome. The loneliness crept in gradually, like fog rolling off the Columbia River. At first, I filled the empty spaces with activities, volunteer work, book clubs. I redecorated Sofia's old room twice, turning it into a craft room, then a home office, then back to a guest room for visits that never came. I learned to cook for one after decades of family meals, mastering the art of dividing recipes and eating leftovers for days. I adopted a rescue cat named Luna who provided companionship and routine, someone to talk to during the long evenings when the silence became overwhelming. My friends from the school district where I'd worked had their own families, grandchildren, Busy lives that didn't include a widowed colleague who'd retired early. The couples Miguel and I had socialized with gradually stopped inviting me to gatherings, not out of malice, but because my presence reminded them of their own mortality, their own vulnerability. I became the friend they called when they needed advice about their own children, the one they remembered for major holidays and forgotten otherwise. I started therapy with Dr. Patricia Chen, a gentle woman in her 60s who specialized in grief counseling and life transitions. Through our sessions, I began to recognize patterns I'd been blind to for years. How I'd built my entire identity around being needed, around solving other people's problems while neglecting my own needs. How Miguel's death had left me not just missing him, but missing the person I'd been when I was part of a partnership, when I had someone to share the daily details of life with. Sofia's success, which I'd worked so hard to make possible, had created an unexpected consequence. She didn't need the kind of mothering I was desperate to provide. The emergency phone calls, the requests for advice, the casual visits that had filled my calendar when she was younger, all of it had evaporated as she became more capable, more independent, more complete without me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 18 years teaching her to stand on her own feet, and now that she was soaring, I felt like I was falling. The very qualities I'd instilled in her, self-reliance, ambition, emotional strength, had created a distance between us that I didn't know how to bridge. Every attempt to get closer felt like intrusion to her and rejection to me. This year's Mother's Day invitation came via text message, like most of our communication. "Mom, let's do something different this year. Come to SF Saturday. I'll pick you up at the airport." No explanation of what different meant, no discussion of plans, just an instruction to appear, as if my schedule, my life, my preferences were afterthoughts to be managed rather than considered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I should have asked questions, should have pressed for details. But the prospect of spending real time with Sofia, of being invited into her world instead of watching from the periphery, overrode my caution. I booked the flight she suggested, packed carefully, choosing outfits I thought would fit into her sophisticated San Francisco lifestyle. I bought her favorite flowers from the farmer's market, the same pale pink peonies I'd brought her every Mother's Day since she was 7 years old. The flight to San Francisco was smooth, but my nerves weren't. I found myself rehearsing conversations, planning topics that might interest her, mentally cataloging recent news and cultural events that could fill any awkward silences. It struck me as profoundly sad that I needed to prepare to talk to my own daughter, that our relationship had become something requiring strategy and forethought rather than natural ease. Sofia met me at baggage claim looking stunning as always, her thick black hair pulled back in a sleek bun, wearing a tailored blazer and designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She hugged me briefly, efficiently, the way she might greet a business associate. Her perfume was expensive and unfamiliar, nothing like the vanilla body spray she'd worn in high school when she'd still asked my opinion about everything from boys to career choices. The drive to her loft was filled with her commentary about city developments, new restaurants, work projects. I listened, asked appropriate questions, marveled at how accomplished she'd become. But underneath my pride ran a current of sadness I couldn't name. This brilliant, capable woman was my daughter, but she felt like a stranger who happened to share my DNA. Her apartment was a revelation, minimalist and pristine, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. Everything was white and chrome and glass, beautiful but cold. There were no family photos, no sentimental objects, nothing that spoke of the girl who'd once covered her bedroom walls with horse posters and collected seashells from our summer vacations to the Oregon coast. This space belonged to Sofia the professional, not Sofia my daughter. She gave me a brief tour, pointing out architectural features and design elements with the same enthusiasm she might show a potential buyer. The guest room where I'd sleep was immaculate and impersonal, like a high-end hotel. I set my small suitcase on the pristine white bedspread and wondered if I should take my shoes off, if my presence might somehow disturb the perfect order of her life. Dinner was at a restaurant I'd never heard of, but that clearly required reservations weeks in advance. The menu was in 3 languages, the portions artistic, but tiny, the wine list longer than some novels. Sofia ordered for both of us, explaining ingredients and preparation methods like a food critic. I nodded and smiled, trying to appreciate flavors my palate wasn't sophisticated enough to distinguish, wondering when my daughter had become someone who knew about truffle oil and whether wine should breathe. The conversation felt like an interview where I couldn't figure out what job I was applying for. Sofia asked about my health, my finances, my plans for the future, in a tone that suggested she was checking items off a mental list. When I mentioned the community theater production I'd auditioned for, she looked puzzled, as if the idea of me having interests outside of being her mother was vaguely surprising. That night, lying in her guest bed surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of the city, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand when we'd become such strangers to each. When had she stopped calling me mom and started calling me mother? When had her laughter become so measured, her conversation so careful? When had I become someone she managed rather than someone she loved? The next morning was Mother's Day. Sofia made coffee in a machine that looked like it belonged on a spaceship, serving it in delicate cups that required careful handling. She moved around her kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing what she called a special breakfast that turned out to be avocado toast with microgreens and some kind of artisanal jam I'd never heard of. We ate in relative silence, the morning. Sun streaming through those impressive windows, casting everything in a golden light that should have felt warm, but somehow made the distance between us seem even more vast. I complimented the food, the view, the apartment, playing the role of appreciative mother visiting her successful daughter, but inside, I felt like an actor who'd forgotten her lines. After breakfast, Sofia stood up and walked to a sleek white desk by the window. She returned with an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, my name written across it in her precise handwriting. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," she said, her tone oddly formal. "I've been thinking a lot about what you need. What would make you happy? I think it's time." My hands shook slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Barcelona, Spain, departure date 1 week away. One way, no return ticket. Along with it was a letter in Sofia's handwriting and what appeared to be bank statements and legal documents I couldn't immediately process. I looked up at her, confused, my heart beginning to race. "Sofia, I don't understand. What is this?" She sat down across from me, her expression serious but not unkind. "Mom, you've spent your entire adult life taking care of other people. First, Dad, then me, then your students, then everyone else who needed you. You've never taken time to figure out who you are when you're not busy being what everyone else needs." The words hit me like cold water. "I know who I am. I'm your mother." "Are you?" she asked gently. "Or are you Rebecca Martinez, the woman who wanted to study art history in college but chose education instead because it was more practical? The woman who dreamed of traveling to Europe but spent her savings on my Stanford tuition? The woman who's been sleepwalking through her own life for so long she's forgotten she has one?" I stared at the ticket, the impossible gift that felt more like exile. "You want me to go to Spain? Alone? For how long?" Sofia reached across the table and took my hands. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "As long as it takes. Mom, you're 54. Years old. You're healthy. You're smart. You're capable of amazing things. But you're also disappearing a little bit more each day, turning into this smaller and smaller version of yourself." The tears started then, hot and unexpected. I don't understand. Are you sending me away? Did I do something wrong? No, Mom. You did everything right. Too right. You were so busy being the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect caregiver, that you forgot to be a person. And now that I don't need taking care of anymore, you don't know what to do with yourself. She handed me the legal documents. I've set up an account for you. There's enough money for a year abroad, maybe more if you're careful. The house is paid off. I made the last payment last month. Consider it my graduation gift, 8 years late. You can rent it out for income or sell it, or keep it exactly as it is. That's up to you. I couldn't speak. The enormity of what she was proposing, the kindness and cruelty of it intertwined, left me speechless. Mom, when's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? When's the last time you made a decision based on what would make you happy instead of what other people needed from you? I tried to remember and couldn't. Every choice I'd made for decades had been filtered through someone else's needs first. Miguel's career moves, Sofia's education, my students' success, my elderly neighbor's emergencies, even my grief after Miguel's death had been shaped by Sofia's needs, my determination to be strong for her, to not burden her with my pain. Go find yourself, Mom, Sofia said, and her voice was gentler now, more like the daughter I remembered. Figure out who Rebecca Martinez is when she's not busy being indispensable to everyone else. Learn Spanish, take art classes, fall in love with a mysterious European, write bad poetry, drink wine in sidewalk cafes, make mistakes, have adventures, do all the things you gave up to give me the life I have now. The ticket felt heavy in my hands, weighted with possibility and terror in equal measure. What if I can't? What if I don't know how to be anything other than your mother? Sofia smiled, and for the first time all weekend, it reached her eyes. Then you'll figure it out, the same way you figured out how to be a single mother after Dad died, the same way you figured out how to pay for my education on a teacher's salary, the same way you figured out everything else your whole life. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bay where sailboats dotted the water like white butterflies. I love you, Mom, more than you know. But I can't be the only thing that gives your life meaning anymore. It's not fair to either of us. The words hung in the air between us, true and painful and necessary. I looked at the ticket again, at the departure date that was racing toward me whether I was ready or not. Barcelona. I'd dreamed of going there when I was 22, had taped pictures of Gaudi's architecture to my dorm room wall. I'd imagined walking down Las Ramblas, visiting the Picasso Museum, sitting in the Parc Güell watching the sunset paint the city golden. That was 32 years ago, before Miguel, before Sofia, before I'd become so skilled at putting everyone else's dreams. First that I'd forgotten I'd ever had any of my own. 1 week, I said, my voice barely a whisper. 1 week, Sofia confirmed. I'll help you pack, help you prepare. But Mom, this isn't a suggestion. This is happening. You're going. The week that followed felt like watching my life through someone else's eyes. Sofia had meant what she said. This wasn't negotiable. She threw herself into preparations with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything else, creating spreadsheets of essential Spanish phrases, researching neighborhoods in Barcelona, even downloading apps onto my phone that would help me navigate a foreign city alone. I moved through those 7 days in a strange dreamlike state, part terror and part unexpected excitement. When I called Dr. Chen to cancel our upcoming sessions, she listened to my explanation with what I could only describe as professional delight. Rebecca, this is extraordinary, she said. Do you realize what your daughter has given you? Permission to rediscover yourself without guilt. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for that kind of freedom. But freedom felt overwhelming when you'd spent 3 decades in comfortable chains. I stood in my bedroom, the same bedroom I'd shared with Miguel, where I'd nursed Sofia through childhood illnesses, where I'd cried myself to sleep after the funeral, and tried to decide what version of myself to pack for Barcelona. The conservative clothes I wore to school functions, the slightly more adventurous outfits I'd bought but never worn, the hiking boots I'd purchased optimistically but used only twice. Sofia arrived Thursday evening with a suitcase I'd never seen before, sleek and European-looking with wheels that actually rolled smoothly. "We're starting fresh," she announced, examining my modest wardrobe with the critical eye of someone who'd learned to navigate corporate boardrooms and international business meetings. "Mom, when's the last time you bought clothes for yourself? And I mean really for yourself, not because you needed something appropriate for a parent-teacher conference." I couldn't remember. Shopping had become purely functional, replacing worn-out items, buying things that were practical and affordable and utterly forgettable. Standing there watching Sofia efficiently sort through my closet, I realized I'd been dressing like an invisible person for years, choosing clothes that helped me blend into the background rather than express anything about who I was or who I wanted to be. "We're going shopping," Sofia declared. "Tomorrow, all day." The shopping expedition was a revelation and a humiliation rolled into one. At 34, Sofia had developed a sophisticated sense of style that I'd never possessed. Even in my 20s, she led me through boutiques I'd never dared enter, holding up clothes that seemed too young, too expensive, too bold for someone like me. "Try it on," she kept saying, pushing me toward dressing rooms with armfuls of items I would never have, chosen for myself. "Mom, you're not dead. You're 54, not 94. Stop dressing like you're apologizing for taking up space." The woman staring back at me in those dressing room mirrors was a stranger, in a flowing coral blouse that brought out the warmth in my brown eyes. I looked like someone who might have opinions about art and politics. In well-fitted jeans that actually flattered my figure instead of hiding it, I looked like someone who might laugh loudly in restaurants or dance to street musicians. In a sundress the color of Mediterranean sunshine, I looked like someone who belonged in Barcelona. Sofia sat outside the dressing rooms, occasionally calling out encouragement or gentle criticism. "That color is perfect on you, Mom. Buy it." Or, "No, that's too safe. Try the blue one." It struck me that this was the most engaged she'd been with me in years, the most present and attentive. It was as if she'd been waiting for me to become someone worth her interest. We bought clothes I'd never owned before, a leather jacket that made me feel slightly dangerous, comfortable walking shoes that looked European rather than American, dresses that skimmed my body rather than hiding. Sofia insisted on new luggage, new accessories, even new makeup from a counter where the sales associate taught me techniques I'd never learned. "You have beautiful bone structure," the makeup artist told me, blending colors I'd been too timid to try. "Have you always hidden behind such neutral tones?" Had I? Looking at my transformed reflection, I realized I'd been playing it safe for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to catch someone's attention, to look in the mirror and feel pleased with what I saw. The woman looking back at me appeared, confident, interesting, like someone who might have stories to tell. That evening, Sofia cooked dinner at my house. Our house, though increasingly it felt like a museum of a life I was preparing to leave behind. She moved through the kitchen I'd barely updated since the 1990s, making pasta with fresh herbs from the garden Miguel had planted, opening a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries. "Tell me about your European dreams," she said as we sat at the dining room table where we'd shared thousands of meals. "The real ones, not the practical plans you made instead." It had been so long since anyone asked me about my dreams that I struggled to remember them. But as Sofia poured wine and listened with genuine attention, pieces of my younger self began surfacing. The art history degree I'd abandoned for the more secure path of education. The semester abroad I'd planned but canceled when Miguel proposed early. The travel journals I'd kept as a teenager, filled with pictures of places I'd promised myself I'd visit someday. I wanted to see the Sagrada Familia, I found myself saying. I had a poster of it in my college dorm room. I used to stare at it while I studied, imagining what it would feel like to stand in that space, to see how the light came through those windows. Sofia pulled out her phone and started taking notes. What else? The Camino de Santiago. I always thought I'd walk it someday, at least part of it. And I wanted to learn to paint, really paint, not just the watercolor classes I took at the community center. I thought maybe if I could see how the light worked in different places, how other artists captured it. My voice trailed off, embarrassed by these half-forgotten ambitions that seemed so naive now. But Sofia was leaning forward, engaged, in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, asking endless questions about everything. Why didn't you? The question hung in the air. Why hadn't I? The practical reasons seemed so logical at the time. Miguel's job opportunities, Sofia's needs, financial constraints, timing that was never quite right. But underneath all of that was a deeper truth I'd never examined closely. I guess I thought, there would be time later, I said finally. After you were grown, after retirement, after everything settled down. I kept putting my life on hold for everyone else's life to happen first. Sofia reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Mom, what if later is now? That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house I'd called home for 22 years, seeing it with new eyes. The living room where Sofia had built countless blanket forts, where Miguel and I had watched movies on Friday nights, where I'd sat alone for the past 8 years reading books and waiting for my life to resume. The kitchen where I'd packed thousands of school lunches, where I'd taught Sofia to make her grandmother's tamales, where I now ate solitary dinners while listening to NPR. Everything was exactly as it had been when Miguel died, as if preserving the space could somehow preserve the happiness we'd shared here. But preservation wasn't living, I realized. It was just a more comfortable form of dying. In Sofia's old bedroom, now my craft room, I found the sketch pad I'd bought 3 years ago with grand intentions of taking up drawing again. It was still, pristine, unused except for a few tentative lines I'd made before losing confidence. Underneath it was a folder of travel brochures I'd collected over the years, European river cruises, art tours of Italy, photography workshops in Provence. Dreams I'd filed away for someday. The next morning, Sofia returned with a laptop and a determined expression. We're planning your adventure, she announced, setting up at the kitchen table with the efficiency of a military campaign. I've researched language schools in Barcelona. There's one in the Gothic Quarter that offers intensive Spanish courses for adults. They also have art classes, painting, ceramics, even art history tours of the major museums. She pulled up websites showing narrow medieval streets, sunny plazas lined with cafes, markets bursting with fresh flowers and exotic foods. It looked like a movie set, too beautiful and foreign to be real. Here, she said, clicking on an apartment. Listing. This is a short-term rental in the Gracia neighborhood. It's artistic, bohemian, full of locals rather than tourists. There's a market 2 blocks away, and the metro will take you anywhere in the city. The apartment was small but charming, with traditional Catalan tiles and French doors opening, onto a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. It looked like the kind of place where someone interesting might live, someone who knew how to be alone without being lonely. I can't afford this, I protested, though even as I said it, I was imagining myself drinking morning coffee on that balcony, watching the Spanish sun climb over the rooftops. Yes, you can. Sofia handed me a bank statement I didn't recognize. Mom, remember when Dad's life insurance paid off the house? You never touched the extra money. You just let it sit in a savings account earning practically nothing for 8 years. There's more than enough for a year abroad, maybe 2 if you're careful. I stared at the numbers, shocked by how much I'd accumulated without realizing it. Money I'd forgotten about while worrying about every grocery bill, every utility payment, every small expense that felt significant when you're living on a teacher's pension. You've been living like you're poor when you're not, Sofia continued. You've been living like you don't deserve nice things, like spending money on yourself is somehow selfish or irresponsible. But Mom, who are you saving it for? What are you waiting for? The question hit harder than she probably intended. What was I waiting for? Some perfect future moment when it would be okay to want things, to spend money on experiences rather than just necessities? Permission from someone to start living my own life? I'm scared, I admitted, the words coming out smaller than I'd intended. Sofia's expression softened. Of course you are. You're about to do something completely outside your comfort zone. But Mom, you've been living in fear for 8 years. Fear of spending too much, fear of wanting too much, fear of taking up too much space in the world. What's the worst thing that could happen if you go to Barcelona? I thought about it seriously. I could run out of money. I could get sick and not know how to navigate a foreign healthcare system. I could be lonely and miserable and not speak enough Spanish to make friends. I could fail completely at whatever I'm supposed to discover about myself. Okay, Sofia said matter-of-factly. And if any of those things happen, you come home. You still have this house, you still have your pension, you still have me. But what if the opposite happens? What if you love it? What if you discover you're braver and more adaptable than you think? What if you find out there's a whole person inside you that you've never met? She opened another browser tab showing art classes at the Barcelona Museum of Contemporary Art, beginning oil painting for adults, landscape sketching in Park Güell, art history walking tours conducted in English with optional Spanish practice. It was like a catalog of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider. I've also found a therapist who speaks English, Sofia said, typing in another search. Dr. Elena Varga. She specializes in life transitions and works with a lot of expatriate clients, just in case you need someone to talk to while you're figuring things out. The efficiency with which she'd arranged my entire life transformation was both touching and slightly overwhelming. But as I watched her navigate websites and take notes, I realized this was Sofia's way of showing love, through careful planning and practical solutions. She was giving me what she thought I needed most, a roadmap out of the life I'd outgrown. There's something else, she said, her tone becoming more serious. I need to tell you why I'm really doing this. I looked up from the art class descriptions, sensing a shift in the conversation. Mom, I've been watching you disappear for years. Every time I come home, you seem smaller, quieter, less like the woman who raised me. You've turned into this apologetic version of yourself. As if you're sorry for still being alive after Dad died. Sorry for having needs or wants or opinions. Her words stung because they were true. I had been apologizing for my existence, treating my own life as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a gift to be celebrated. You used to have fire, Sofia continued. You used to argue with Dad about politics over dinner. You used to sing while you cooked. You used to have opinions about everything from school board decisions to movie choices. Where did that woman go? I couldn't answer because I didn't know. Somewhere between grief and guilt and the gradual erosion of confidence that comes from years of putting yourself last, I'd lost track of who I was when I wasn't being useful to someone else. I want her back, Sofia said simply. I want my mom back. Not the careful, diminished version who's afraid to express preferences or take up space. I want the woman who fought for my education funding when the school district tried to cut the art program. I want the woman who drove through a blizzard to get to my high school graduation because nothing could have kept her away. Tears were streaming down my face now, not from sadness, but from recognition. She was describing someone I remembered being, someone I'd liked being. Someone I'd somehow lost along the way. Go to Barcelona, Mom. Not because I'm sending you away, but because I'm giving you permission to find yourself again. And when you do, when you remember who Rebecca Martinez is when she's not busy taking care of everyone else, I'll still be here. I'll be waiting to meet her. The next day was my last day in Portland, and Sofia insisted on driving me to the airport herself. We stopped at Powell's Books first, where she bought me a Spanish-English dictionary, a guidebook to Barcelona, and a beautiful leather journal. For recording your adventures, she said, and your revelations, and your complaints. When everything goes wrong and you want to come home, standing in the international departures terminal, holding my boarding pass to a life I couldn't yet imagine, I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Sofia hugged me longer than she had in years, and when she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. "Go find yourself, Mom," she whispered. "I can't wait to meet whoever you discover you are." As I walked toward the security checkpoint, my new leather jacket slung over my arm and my Spanish dictionary tucked into my carry-on bag, I realized that for the first time in decades, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what I needed. The plane descended through clouds that looked like cotton candy, revealing a sprawling city where ancient stone buildings sat shoulder to shoulder with gleaming modern towers. Barcelona spread out below me like a living map, and I pressed my face to the window like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. My hands trembled as I gripped the armrests, not from fear of flying, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. Walking through El Prat Airport, I felt like an imposter in my new clothes, carrying luggage that looked too sophisticated for someone who hadn't traveled internationally in 20 years. The Spanish voices swirling around me sounded musical and fast, completely incomprehensible, despite the basic phrases Sofia had made me practice. But instead of panic, I felt something unexpected, a flutter of excitement, like the first day of school when you're nervous but eager to discover what you're capable of learning. The taxi driver spoke broken English mixed with rapid Catalan, pointing out landmarks as we drove into the city. "First time Barcelona?" he asked, catching my wide-eyed expression in the rearview mirror. "First time anywhere," I admitted, which made him laugh, not mockingly, but with genuine warmth. "You pick good city for first adventure," he said. Barcelona, she changed people, you see? The Grazia neighborhood was even more charming than the photos had suggested. Narrow streets lined with 6-story buildings painted in warm earth tones, their facades decorated with wrought iron balconies overflowing with plants. Street art transformed blank walls into murals that told stories I couldn't yet read but somehow understood. Young people sat at sidewalk cafes. Elderly men played chess in small plazas. Children kicked soccer balls against medieval walls that had stood for centuries. My apartment building looked like something from a fairy tale, with an ornate doorway and a tiny elevator that creaked as it carried me to the 3rd floor. The key stuck in the lock for a terrifying moment before turning, and then I was standing in my new temporary home, surrounded by silence that felt different from the lonely quiet of my Portland house. The space was small but perfect. Exposed wooden beams, traditional tiles in blues and whites, French doors leading to the balcony Sofia had shown me online. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything golden. I set my suitcases down and walked to the balcony, pushing open the doors to let in the sounds of the city below. Children were playing in the courtyard across the street, their laughter mixing with the distant hum of traffic and the melody of someone practicing piano. An elderly woman was hanging laundry on a balcony 2 buildings over, and she waved when she saw me watching. I waved back, my first human connection in Barcelona, and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. That first night, I was too jet-lagged and overwhelmed to venture far. I found a small grocery store on the corner where the owner patiently helped me identify basic necessities: bread, cheese, fruit, a bottle of wine. My Spanish was terrible, but somehow we communicated through gestures and smiles. and he threw in a small bouquet of flowers para la casa nueva, for the new house. Sitting on my balcony as the sun set over Barcelona, eating simple food and drinking wine that tasted like sunshine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The sense that tomorrow could bring anything, that I was in a place where nobody knew who I was supposed to be or what role I was supposed to play. I called Sofia from my new phone, which she'd insisted on buying and setting up with an international plan. I made it, I told her, though those 2 words felt inadequate to describe the magnitude of the journey. How do you feel? She asked. I looked out at the lights beginning to twinkle in windows across the neighborhood, listened to the musical conversation of people passing on the street below. Terrified and alive, I said, like I'm about to become someone I've never been before. Good, Sofia said, and I could hear her smiling. That's exactly right. The next morning, I walked to the language school Sofia had found for me, getting lost twice but discovering a beautiful hidden plaza and a bookstore with cats sleeping among the stacks. The Escuela de Idiomas Barcelona occupied a renovated, modernist building in the Gothic quarter, all curved lines and colored tiles that seemed to flow like water. Maria Carmen, the director, was a woman about my age with silver-streaked hair and eyes that crinkled with laugh lines. She conducted my assessment in English, asking about my goals and background with genuine curiosity rather than bureaucratic efficiency. Why Barcelona? She asked. Why now? The honest answer felt too complicated to explain to a stranger, but Maria Carmen had the kind of face that invited truth. My daughter gave me a one-way ticket and told me to find myself, I said. I'm 54 years old, and I just realized I have no idea who I am when I'm not busy taking care of other people. Maria Carmen nodded as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Ah, the madre syndrome. Very common among women of our generation. You will fit perfectly in our afternoon group. All expatriates rediscovering themselves in Barcelona. Some running from something, some running toward something. You, I think, are doing both. She was right. The afternoon Spanish class was filled with people in various stages of life transition. Thomas, a recently divorced engineer from Germany, learning Spanish before moving to Argentina to teach sustainable farming. Ingrid, a Swedish artist who'd sold everything to study ceramics in Spain after her children left home. James, a British journalist writing a book about European food culture while recovering from a heart attack that had forced him to reevaluate everything. At first, I felt like the least interesting person in the room. What was my story? I was a guidance counselor who forgot to counsel herself, seemed pathetic compared to their dramatic life changes. But as we practiced introductions in halting Spanish, I realized we all shared something fundamental. The courage to admit our old lives weren't working, and the willingness to do something about it. Spanish was harder than I'd expected, but not impossible. My teacher's mother had died young, making me hypersensitive to pronoun usage and gender agreements that seemed arbitrary and cruel. But there was something liberating about struggling with a new language, about making mistakes that had nothing to do with my past identity or failures. When I mispronounced embarazada, pregnant, instead of embarazosa, embarrassed, the whole class erupted in laughter, including me. It had been months since I'd laughed at myself without shame. After 3 weeks of classes, Maria Carmen suggested I try the art history walking tours she occasionally led for students wanting to practice Spanish while exploring the city. Your pronunciation is improving, she said, but more importantly, I see how your face changes when we discuss culture and art. There is passion there waiting to wake up. The first tour was a revelation. We walked through the Gothic quarter, and Maria Carmen explained how each period of history had left its mark on the architecture. Roman foundations beneath medieval walls, modernist facades added to Renaissance buildings, contemporary art installations nestled in ancient squares. Barcelona wasn't a museum city trying to preserve one perfect moment in time. It was a living, breathing place that had embraced change for over 2,000 years. Standing in the Plaza del Rey, where Ferdinand and Isabella supposedly received Columbus after his first voyage to the Americas, I felt connected to something larger than my personal story. All around me were layers of human experience, dreams built on top of dreams, lives that had mattered and been forgotten, and somehow mattered again in the stones beneath my feet. History is not just facts, Maria Carmen explained in her careful English mixed with Spanish phrases we were learning. History is people deciding to be brave enough to change their circumstances. Sometimes the change is small, a merchant, deciding to trade with strangers from another land. Sometimes it is large, an explorer sailing toward an unknown continent. But always, it begins with someone saying, "Perhaps there is another way to live." Her words felt like a direct message to me. Perhaps there was another way to live. Perhaps 54 wasn't too late to discover what that might look like. I started taking the painting classes Maria Carmen had mentioned, held in a converted warehouse space in the Elborn neighborhood. The teacher, an elderly Catalan man named Jordi who'd been painting Barcelona street scenes for 40 years, spoke no English and showed no patience for students who wanted to be coddled. "Pintar es ver," he would say firmly. "To paint is to see." At first, my attempts were laughably bad. I'd been so focused on getting everything right, the correct proportions, the accurate colors, the recognizable representation, that I'd forgotten to actually look at what I was trying to capture. Jordi would stand behind me, making frustrated clucking sounds, then take my brush and make a few bold strokes that somehow transformed my tentative, careful marks into something alive. "No think so much," he told me through another student who translated. "Think is for homework. Paint is for feeling." Slowly, I began to understand what he meant. When I stopped worrying about whether my painting looked good and started paying attention to how the afternoon light fell across the fountain in Plaza de la Revolución, something shifted. The paint began to move differently under my brush. Colors started mixing in ways that surprised me. I wasn't just copying what I saw, I was interpreting it, adding my own understanding of light and shadow and emotion. One afternoon, painting in Park Güell while tourists posed for selfies with Gaudi's famous mosaic lizard, I had what could only be described as an epiphany. I was working on a canvas showing the view from the park's main terrace, the sprawling city below, the Mediterranean stretching to the horizon, when I realized I was painting not just a landscape, but a feeling. The feeling of standing in a place Antoni Gaudí had imagined more than a century ago, seeing a view that had inspired countless artists, being part of an ongoing conversation between human creativity and natural beauty. My painting wasn't good, by any technical standard, but it was mine in a way nothing had been mine for decades. Every brushstroke was a choice I'd made, a color I'd mixed, a perspective I'd decided mattered. Looking at the canvas, I saw not just Barcelona, but my own emerging sense of what I found beautiful, worth preserving, worth sharing with others. That evening, I walked home through streets I was beginning to know by heart, carrying my easel and paint box like badges of a new identity. In a shop window, I caught my reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Suntanned from hours of outdoor painting, hair grown longer and streaked with silver I'd stopped trying to hide. Wearing clothes paint-stained from the day's work, I looked like someone who had important things to do, places to be, art to create. I started frequenting a small cafe near my apartment where the owner, Esperanza, had taken a motherly interest in my language progress. She would correct my pronunciation while serving cortados and pastries, introduce me to other regular customers, and gradually draw me into the neighborhood's daily rhythms. Through Esperanza, I met Carmen, who taught ceramics from her studio, apartment upstairs, and through Carmen, I met David, a retired philosophy professor who led informal discussion groups about art and literature in Catalan and Spanish. These weren't profound friendships like the ones I'd built over decades in Portland, but they were something I hadn't expected to find. Easy companionship with people who knew me only as Rebecca who paints, Rebecca who is learning Spanish, Rebecca who asks thoughtful questions about Catalonian independence. Not Rebecca the mother, Rebecca the widow, Rebecca who should be grateful for whatever attention she receives. My phone calls with Sofia became less frequent but more genuine. Instead of dutiful check-ins where we both performed our assigned roles, our conversations became accounts of discoveries and questions. I told her about the morning I'd successfully ordered breakfast entirely in Spanish, about the afternoon I'd gotten lost in the labyrinthine streets of the Gothic Quarter and found a tiny church with frescoes that made me cry, about the painting class where I'd finally captured the particular quality of Mediterranean light that had been eluding me for weeks. "You sound different," Sofia said during one of our calls. "Your voice sounds bigger somehow." I knew what she meant. I felt bigger, more present in my own life. Walking to the market each morning, I noticed things. The way morning light painted the buildings warm gold, how the street vendors arranged their displays of fruits and vegetables like still-life paintings, the musical quality of conversations flowing between Catalan and Spanish and Arabic and English. I was developing opinions about which bakery made the best croissants, which plaza had the most interesting street musicians, which time of day provided the best light for painting. 6 months into my Barcelona adventure, I received an email that would have terrified the woman who'd stepped off the plane at El Prat. The Museum of Contemporary Art was organizing an exhibition called Barcelona Through New Eyes, featuring work by expatriate artists who'd found inspiration in the city. Applications were open to anyone who'd been painting in Barcelona for less than 2 years. My first instinct was to delete the email. I wasn't a real artist. I was a middle-aged woman playing with paints, pretending to be creative while avoiding the real work of figuring out what came next in my life. But then I remembered Jordy's voice. "No, think so much. Paint is for feeling." I had been feeling more intensely in the past 6 months than I had in the previous 6 years. Every painting was a record of an emotion, a moment of connection with the city that had become my teacher, my therapist, my home. Maybe that was enough. Maybe being a real artist wasn't about technical perfection or formal training, but about paying attention to the world and finding ways to share what you discovered. I submitted 3 paintings: the view from Park Güell that had marked my artistic breakthrough, a street scene from my neighborhood showing children playing between laundry lines and flower boxes, and a portrait of Esperanza behind her cafe counter, surrounded by the warm light of late afternoon. With each submission, I included a brief artist statement that felt like the most honest thing I'd written in years. I came to Barcelona not knowing who I was when I wasn't taking care of other people. These paintings are maps of my rediscovery, not just of a beautiful city, but of the woman I'd forgotten I could be. They represent 6 months of learning to see with my own eyes instead of through everyone else's expectations. 2 weeks later, I received notification that all 3 paintings had been accepted for the exhibition. Reading the email in Esperanza's cafe, I started crying, not from sadness but from astonishment. Someone, a panel of professional curators, thought my work was worth showing to strangers. They thought my vision of Barcelona, my particular way of seeing and feeling and interpreting, had value. The opening reception was held on a warm September evening, with the museum's white walls glowing under professional lighting that made every piece look important, worthy of attention. I wore a dress I'd bought at a vintage shop in Elborn, deep blue silk that floated when I moved, making me feel elegant and artistic, and completely unlike my former self. Standing in front of my paintings, listening to strangers discuss my use of color and composition, I felt a joy so pure it was almost painful. A young art student from Madrid told me my street scene captured something she'd been trying to express in her own work: the way ordinary life in Barcelona could feel magical without being precious. An elderly German couple spent 10 minutes studying my cafe portrait. nodding and murmuring appreciatively about the quality of light. But the moment that changed everything was when a woman about my age approached me after reading my artist's statement. "I'm Linda," she said in accented English. "American, living here 5 years now. I did exactly what you did, came to Barcelona to find myself after my divorce. Your paintings, they show the joy of that discovery, the brave happiness of starting over." We talked for an hour about the courage it takes to rebuild a life from scratch, about the particular freedom that comes from being unknown in a new place, about the way Barcelona seemed designed to help people reinvent themselves. By the end of the evening, Linda had invited me to join her hiking group, English-speaking expatriates who explored the mountains outside Barcelona on weekends. Walking home through the Gothic quarter after the reception, my artist's badge still pinned to my dress, I called Sofia for the first time in weeks. When she answered, I could hear the sounds of her sophisticated San Francisco life in the background. Clinking glasses, professional conversation, the urban symphony I used to find intimidating. "Mom," she said, surprised by the late-night call. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is more than okay," I told her. "Sofia, I had 3 paintings in an art exhibition tonight. Real paintings, in a real museum. People looked at them and saw something worth discussing." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Sofia's voice came through, thick with emotion. "Mom, I am so proud of you I can barely speak. Tell me everything." I told her about the exhibition, about my painting classes and new friendships, about the woman I was becoming in Barcelona's sun-drenched streets. As I talked, I realized that for the first time in our adult relationship, I had stories that excited her, accomplishments that impressed her, a life that seemed worth living rather than simply enduring. "When are you coming home?" she asked, and I heard something new in her voice. Not obligation or duty, but genuine curiosity about my answer. "I don't know," I said, and the honesty of it felt revolutionary. "I'm not ready yet. There's still so much I want to discover, so much I want to create." "Is that okay, Mom?" Sofia said, her voice warm with affection I hadn't heard in years. "It's more than okay. It's everything I hoped for when I bought you that ticket." Walking up the stairs to my apartment, I realized that somewhere between learning to paint Mediterranean light and ordering café con leche in confident Spanish, I had become someone I genuinely liked spending time with. Rebecca Martinez wasn't just the supporting character in other people's stories anymore. She was the protagonist of her own adventure, and the best chapters were still being written. 8 months into my Barcelona adventure, I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't thought about my old life in Portland for 3 entire days. The realization should have troubled me, but instead it felt like emerging from a long illness. The gradual awareness that pain you'd grown accustomed to carrying was simply gone. My daily routine had evolved into something unrecognizable from my former existence. Mornings began with café con leche at Esperanza's, where I'd review my Spanish homework while she told me neighborhood gossip in a mixture of Catalan and Spanish I was beginning to understand. Afternoons were for painting, sometimes in classes with Jordi, who had grudgingly admitted I was developing un ojo interesante, an interesting eye, sometimes alone in parks or plazas where the light called to me. Evenings belonged to exploration. Linda's hiking group had introduced me to the mountains surrounding Barcelona, where ancient monasteries clung to cliff faces and medieval villages seemed untouched by time. We'd climbed to Montserrat to see the famous Black Madonna, hiked the coastal paths of Costa Brava, where the Mediterranean crashed against dramatic cliffs, explored the volcanic region of La Garrocha, where I'd painted landscapes that looked like another planet. Each expedition revealed layers of Catalonia I hadn't known existed. In the mountain village of Rupit, I'd sketched stone houses that seemed to grow from the rocks themselves. In Cadaqués, where Salvador Dalí had lived and worked, I'd understood for the first time how landscape could shape an artist's imagination. The twisted olive trees, the impossible blue of the Mediterranean, the way light bounced off whitewashed walls. It was surrealism before Dalí ever picked up a brush. But the transformation went deeper than geographic discovery. I was changing, in ways that surprised even me. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space now claimed tables at busy restaurants with confidence. The woman who had dressed to disappear now wore colors that made strangers smile. The woman who had swallowed her opinions to keep peace now found herself debating politics with David's philosophy group, arguing about art with fellow painters, even correcting Geordie when I disagreed with his critique of my work. "You have found your voice," Maria Carmen observed during one of our weekly conversations over coffee. "Not just in Spanish, though your grammar is much improved, but in life. You speak now like someone who believes her thoughts matter." The comment surprised me because I hadn't consciously decided to change how I expressed myself. But looking back, I could trace the evolution. It had started with simple choices, ordering specific foods instead of accepting whatever was offered, choosing museums based on my interests rather than guidebook recommendations, painting subjects that fascinated me regardless of whether they were appropriate for my skill level. Each small assertion of preference had built confidence for larger ones. When Thomas from my Spanish class had asked me on a date and I wasn't interested, I'd said no directly instead of making excuses. When a fellow painter had criticized my technique in a way that felt more about his ego than helpful feedback, I'd thanked him politely and continued painting exactly as I chose. When Sofia had suggested during one of our calls that perhaps it was time to think about returning to Portland, I'd surprised us both by saying, "Not yet. I'm still becoming." The second art exhibition opportunity came through David's philosophy group. A gallery in the trendy El Poblenou district was featuring Women Over 50 New Visions as part of International Women's Day celebrations. The theme resonated deeply, not just because of my age, but because of how fundamentally my vision of everything had shifted since arriving in Barcelona. I submitted a series I'd been working on called Letters to My Former Self, paintings inspired by locations where I'd experienced moments of profound realization. The cafe table where I'd first successfully conducted an entire conversation in Spanish. The bench in Parc de la Ciutadella, where I'd cried reading a letter from an old colleague describing budget cuts that would have devastated me a year ago, but now felt like news from another planet. The beach at Barceloneta, where I'd watched the sunrise after staying up all night painting, feeling more awake and alive than I had in decades. Each painting was accompanied by a brief text, imagined letters to the woman I'd been before Barcelona. "Dear Rebecca, who apologizes for existing," one began. "Today, I took up space at a gallery opening and enjoyed every minute of it." Another. Read, "Dear Rebecca, who fears being judged, I painted badly today and laughed about it. Tomorrow I'll paint better, but today's terrible painting taught me something tomorrow's good one might not." The gallery opening drew a different crowd than the museum exhibition. Younger, edgier, more diverse. I found myself in conversations about feminism and aging, about the courage required to start over in midlife, about the particular challenges faced by women who had spent decades defining themselves through relationships rather than individual achievement. A journalist from a local English-language magazine interviewed me about the series. "What would you tell other women who feel trapped in lives that no longer fit?" she asked. The question hung in the air as I thought about how to answer honestly. "I would tell them that their children's success doesn't require their sacrifice," I said finally. "That love without boundaries isn't actually love. It's erasure. That it's possible to spend so much energy being what other people need that you forget you're allowed to need things too." The interview was published 2 weeks later with the headline, "The Liberation of Rebecca Martinez: How One Woman's Exile Became Her Salvation." Reading it online, I barely recognized the confident, articulate person quoted throughout the article. Yet every word was mine, every insight hard-won through months of daily choices to prioritize my own growth over everyone else's comfort. Sofia called after reading the interview online. "Mom, you've become famous," she said, and I could hear genuine amazement in her voice. "My colleagues have been sending me the link all day. Everyone wants to know how my mother became this inspiring artist-philosopher living her best life in Barcelona." "Is that how you see me now?" I asked, curious about her perspective on my transformation. "I see you as the woman I always hoped you could become," Sofia said quietly. "The woman I caught glimpses of when I was little, before you decided that good mothers had to disappear into their families. You're bigger now, Mom. Not just louder or more confident, but more fully present in your own life." Her words moved me more than any art review could have. To be seen clearly by your child, to be recognized not just as a mother but as a complete human being. It felt like a gift I'd waited decades to receive. Spring in Barcelona brought new possibilities. Through connections made at gallery openings and hiking expeditions, I was invited to join a group of expatriate women starting a small business, art tours for English-speaking visitors who wanted to see Barcelona through local artists' eyes. My role would be leading walking tours that combined art history with practical painting instruction, ending at cafes where participants could sketch while discussing what they'd learned. The prospect terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. A year ago, I would have declined immediately, convinced I lacked the expertise or authority for such a role. Now, I found myself crafting a detailed proposal that drew on everything I learned about Barcelona's artistic heritage, combined with practical knowledge of the best spots for outdoor painting and the neighborhoods where creativity flourished. "Art is not about perfection," I wrote in my proposal. "It's about paying attention to the world with intention and sharing what you discover. Our tours will teach participants to see Barcelona as artists see it, not just as a collection of famous buildings, but as a living canvas where light and shadow, color and texture, ancient and modern, create new stories every day." The business partners, Linda from my hiking group, Carmen the ceramicist, and Ingrid from my Spanish class, read my proposal with growing excitement. "This is exactly what Barcelona needs," Linda declared. "Not another generic tour group, but something that actually transforms how people experience the city." We launched Barcelona Through Artists' Eyes in May, with me leading my first tour on a perfect spring morning when the Gothic Quarter seemed to glow with golden light. My group included a retired teacher from Australia, a young couple from Canada celebrating their anniversary, and a woman from Chicago who had just gone through a difficult divorce and was traveling alone for the first time in 20 years. Standing in the Plaza del Pi, teaching strangers to notice how morning light revealed the texture of medieval stones, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced. Every skill I'd developed, as an educator, as someone who understood life transitions, as an emerging artist, came together in service of something uniquely mine. "Look at how the shadows create depth," I told my group as we sketched the facade of Santa Maria del Pi. In art, as in life, it's often the dark spaces that give meaning to the light. The divorced woman from Chicago looked up from her sketch pad with tears in her eyes. "I never thought about shadows being necessary for light," she said. "I've been so focused on getting out of the dark parts of my life that I didn't consider they might be what makes the bright parts meaningful." That evening, I sat on my balcony reviewing the day's sketches and notes, planning improvements for future tours. My phone buzzed with a text from Sofia. "Saw your business mentioned in a travel blog. Barcelona Through Artists' Eyes is getting 5-star reviews. I'm so proud I'm literally showing the article to strangers on the subway." The success felt surreal but also deeply earned. Every morning of language practice, every afternoon of struggle with paint and canvas, every evening of pushing myself to engage with new people and ideas had led to this moment. The creation of something valuable that existed because of my Particular combination of experience, skills, and perspective. But perhaps the most profound change was internal. Somewhere between learning to see Barcelona with an artist's eye and finding the confidence to share that vision with others, I had stopped waiting for permission to inhabit my own life fully. The woman who had once asked Sofia's approval before buying a new dress now made decisions based on her own judgment and desires. The woman who had once apologized for having opinions now stated them clearly and backed them up with evidence. The shift became apparent during a video call with Dr. Chen, my former therapist in Portland, who had followed my journey through our occasional check-ins. "Rebecca, you're sitting differently," she observed. "Your posture, your facial expressions, even the way you use your hands when you talk, everything suggests someone who is comfortable taking up space." She was right. I hadn't noticed the physical manifestations of my internal transformation, but they were unmistakable once she pointed them out. I sat straighter, gestured more expressively, met the camera's gaze directly instead of looking away when discussing my achievements or future plans. "What do you think has created this change?" Dr. Chen asked. I thought carefully before answering. "I think it's the combination of being unknown and being useful," I said finally. "In Barcelona, no one knew me as anyone's mother or wife or employee. I had to discover what I was worth as just myself. And then I found ways to contribute that drew on my authentic interests and abilities rather than just filling roles other people needed me to play." "And what about your relationship with Sofia? How has that evolved?" The question made me smile. "It's the best it's ever been," I said honestly. "Now that I'm not desperately trying to be needed by her, we can actually enjoy each other's company. Our conversations are about shared interests and mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt." As if summoned by our conversation, Sofia called later that evening with news that surprised me. "Mom, I'm coming to Barcelona," she announced. "I've arranged to work remotely for 2 weeks. I want to see this life you've built, meet these friends you're always talking about, maybe even take one of your art tours." The prospect of Sofia visiting my new world felt momentous. For the first time in our relationship, she would be the outsider, the one adapting to my environment and social circle. The dynamic that had defined us for 30 years, me orbiting around her life and achievements, would be temporarily reversed. "I'd love that," I told her, and meant it completely. "Though I should warn you, I'm not the same person you put on that plane 10 months ago." "I know," Sofia said, her voice warm with affection. "That's exactly why I want to visit. I want to meet the Rebecca Martinez everyone else has been raving about." As summer approached, I found myself making plans that extended far beyond Sofia's visit. The art tour business was growing, with bookings through September and inquiries about adding new themes, food and art, architecture and painting, even a sunset sketching tour that would end with wine at a rooftop bar. More personally, I had started conversations with local galleries about a solo exhibition of my Barcelona series. The paintings I'd created over 10 months told a story of transformation that seemed to resonate with viewers, particularly women navigating their own life transitions. Gallery owners spoke of my work as authentic and emotionally honest, terms that would have bewildered the woman who had arrived at El Prat airport clutching a guidebook and fighting panic attacks. But perhaps most significantly, I had stopped thinking of Barcelona as a temporary escape from my real life. This was my real life: the painting, the teaching, the community of friends who knew me as Rebecca the artist rather than Rebecca the caregiver. The apartment I'd rented for 6 months had become home. The language I'd struggled to pronounce had become the soundtrack of my daily thoughts. The city that had once seemed foreign and intimidating had become the place where I made sense to myself. Standing on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the Gothic quarter in shades of gold and rose, I thought about the woman who had accepted that one-way ticket with such fear and uncertainty. She had been brave without knowing it, stepping toward a future she couldn't imagine because staying in the past had become unbearable. That woman deserved my gratitude, not my pity. Her willingness to be uncomfortable, to fail publicly while learning Spanish, to make terrible paintings before making good ones, to be lonely before finding genuine connection. All of it had been necessary for this moment of profound satisfaction with my own life. My phone buzzed with a message from Esperanza. Rebecca, the man from the art magazine wants to interview you again. He says international publications are interested in your story. You are becoming famous. But you will still come for café con leche tomorrow, yes? I laughed, typing back my confirmation. Yes, I would still come for café con leche tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that, until this chapter of my life led naturally to whatever came next. Because that was what I had learned in Barcelona. That life was meant to be lived chapter by chapter, each one building on the last, but not constrained by it. The woman who had been afraid to want anything for herself had discovered that wanting was not selfish, but essential. The woman who had apologized for taking up space had learned that her particular way of seeing the world was valuable enough to share with strangers. The woman who had believed her story was over had found that the most interesting chapters were only just beginning. Tomorrow, Sofia would arrive to see this new life I'd built from courage and paint and Spanish verbs I still occasionally conjugated incorrectly. She would meet the Rebecca who led art tours and sold paintings and debated philosophy over wine. She would see that her gift of a one-way ticket had not been exile but liberation. The push I'd needed to become the woman I'd always had the potential to be but had never given myself permission to become. And after Sofia's visit, there would be new adventures waiting. Perhaps a painting residency in rural Catalonia I'd heard about through artist friends. Perhaps expansion of the tour business to other Spanish cities. Perhaps simply another year of morning light in Gothic plazas and evening conversations with friends who valued my thoughts and trusted my vision. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, but no longer frightening. I had learned to paint my own life with the same boldness I'd discovered on canvas, accepting that some experiments would fail, some colors would muddy, some compositions would need to be scraped away and started fresh. But always, always continuing to paint, because the alternative was to let the canvas remain blank, and that was no longer acceptable to a woman who had finally learned to see herself as the artist of her own existence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.